When a talk show host attempted to belittle a self-made entrepreneur on live television, she never anticipated that his response would ignite a nationwide movement. The studio buzzed with anticipation as cameras rolled, capturing the palpable energy of the live audience. Today's guest wasn't just another businessman. Malcolm Daniels, a 39-year-old visionary from Oakland, California, had risen from humble beginnings to build a billion-dollar tech empire. His journey was the epitome of perseverance, a testament to defying the odds and rewriting the narrative of success. Across the country, viewers tuned in, eager to hear his story firsthand. But host Diane Strickland had a different agenda. Renowned for her sharp wit and polarizing takes, Diane had built a career on controversy. She thrived on uncomfortable confrontations, the kind that left audiences gasping and ratings skyrocketing. While critics accused her of being manipulative, even biased, her devoted followers saw her as someone who fearlessly spoke her mind, no matter how divisive. For her, this wasn't an opportunity to celebrate Malcolm's achievements. It was a chance to challenge them, to peel back the layers of his success story and expose what she hoped was a less flattering reality. The stage was set, the tension thick in the air. Malcolm, dressed in a crisp navy suit, took his seat opposite Diane under the harsh glow of studio lights. He exuded a quiet confidence, his composed demeanor radiating humility rather than conceit. Meanwhile, Diane leaned in slightly, tapping her pen against her clipboard, her expression unreadable. The exchange remained civil for now, but the atmosphere hinted at an impending clash, a storm just waiting to break. "Welcome to the show, Malcolm," Diane began, her tone light but edged with something sharper, something calculated. "You've been making quite the impact lately. Everyone's talking about how you've revolutionized the tech world. But tell me, don't you think the story around you sounds a little too perfect?" The question lingered, charged with unspoken intent. Malcolm didn't so much as blink. Instead, he offered a small, knowing smile, tilting his head as if weighing her words with care. "Well, Diane," he said smoothly, his voice steady and deliberate, "I don't think it's about perfection, it's about perseverance. My journey hasn't been easy, but I believe hard work and resilience have a way of speaking for themselves." The audience erupted in applause. But Diane remained unmoved. She wasn't here for inspiring sound bites, she was here to dismantle them. What Malcolm didn't realize was that Diane wasn't interested in his perseverance. She was about to challenge everything he stood for, setting the stage for a confrontation no one would forget. As the applause faded, Diane leaned back in her chair, her manicured nails tapping idly against the clipboard in her lap. She gave Malcolm a polite, tight-lipped smile, one that never quite reached her eyes. "Perseverance," she mused, her voice tinged with skepticism. "That's a word we hear a lot these days. But let's be honest, Malcolm, it's not every day that someone from your background ends up sitting in that chair. Are we really supposed to believe it all comes down to hard work?" Malcolm's smile remained unchanged. But for the briefest moment, something flickered in Malcolm's eyes. Was it irritation? Amusement? Whatever it was, he kept it buried beneath his composed exterior. "You're absolutely right," he said smoothly. "There's always more to the story. But if I may ask, what exactly are you suggesting?" Diane let out a light chuckle, casually crossing her legs as if settling in for a battle she'd already won. "Oh, I'm not suggesting anything," she said, her voice drenched in feigned innocence. "I'm just pointing out that, in an industry overwhelmingly dominated by a particular demographic, your rise is nothing short of remarkable. Almost unlikely." The energy in the room shifted. A ripple of murmurs moved through the audience, not loud, but unmistakable. Malcolm remained poised, his hands resting loosely on his lap. He took a brief pause before speaking. "It is remarkable," he acknowledged, his tone even, unshaken. "And I don't take that for granted. But unlikely? No. I believe it's what happens when opportunity meets preparation and relentless effort." Diane arched a brow, unimpressed. "Preparation and effort," she echoed, a subtle scoff in her voice. "Do you think that's the full story? Or do you think certain policies, affirmative action, for instance, might have given you a little boost?" A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Low whispers broke the silence, some shocked, others expectant. Malcolm's expression didn't waver, but the tension in the room thickened. Even the camera crew seemed to hold their breath. Diane had pushed the line. No, she had bulldozed right through it, but her effortless delivery only made it sting more. Malcolm exhaled slowly, letting her words settle. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room, the millions watching from home, waiting for his next move. "I appreciate you bringing that up," he said finally, his voice unwavering, "because it gives me the chance to address a very common misunderstanding about success, particularly mine. But before I respond, Diane, let me ask you this. Would you pose that same question to a guest who didn't look like me?" Silence. For the first time, Diane's confident smirk faltered. Just a flicker, gone as quickly as it appeared, but it was there. And Malcolm had seen it. She quickly straightened, masking the crack in her composure. "Well, Malcolm, I ask tough questions to all my guests," she replied defensively. "It's my job." But the damage was done. And Malcolm wasn't about to let the moment slip away. The audience leaned in, drawn to the brewing storm, their anticipation thick in the air. And Malcolm. He was just getting started. Malcolm shifted slightly in his seat, leaning forward just enough to shrink the space between him and Diane. "I understand that your job is to ask tough questions," he said, his tone as steady as ever. "But when you frame my success as unlikely or suggest that something other than my work ethic got me here, I have to wonder, would you make the same assumptions about someone else?" Diane parted her lips to respond, but Malcolm didn't give her the chance. His words cut through the charged air like a blade. "You see, Diane," he continued, "I've been in spaces where people assume I don't belong. I've had to prove myself 10 times over just to get half the recognition. And even then, there's always someone ready to credit my achievements to anything but my abilities." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. A woman in the front row folded her arms, her displeasure with Diane's line of questioning clear. Malcolm's gaze flickered briefly toward the audience before returning to Diane. "Now, don't get me wrong," he said, his voice softening just enough to take the edge off. "I'm not dismissing the importance of programs like affirmative action. They help level the playing field. But to suggest I'm here because of a handout? That dismisses years of sacrifice and relentless effort. And quite frankly, it's insulting." Diane's polished veneer cracked ever so slightly. Her expression hardened. "I'm not dismissing your effort," she shot back, her voice sharper now. "I'm simply pointing out how certain opportunities come to be. Would you deny that your background, your story, has played a role in the media's fascination with you?" Malcolm held her gaze, a small knowing smile playing at his lips. "Of course, my story plays a role," he acknowledged, nodding slightly. "But that's because my story is one of resilience, not favoritism. People connect with it because it reflects a truth they recognize in their own lives, that despite the obstacles, success is possible if you refuse to give up." Diane crossed her arms, clearly unsatisfied with the direction the conversation had taken. Her eyes flicked down to her clipboard, searching for a way to wrestle back control. But before she could speak, Malcolm leaned back, his voice carrying a quiet but undeniable authority. "And let's not pretend this conversation is just about me, Diane," he added. "When we question the legitimacy of someone's success based on their background, we send a message, a dangerous one. We tell millions of people who look like me that their dreams aren't valid, that their hard work will never be enough." The weight of his words settled over the room like a heavy fog. Then, applause. A wave of it, louder and longer than before. Diane's lips pressed into a thin line. She forced a tight smile. "Well, Malcolm," she said, her voice clipped, "you certainly know how to make a point." But Malcolm wasn't finished. The fire in his voice had only begun to burn, and the audience could feel it. The tension in the room was electric, the air crackling with anticipation. Diane straightened in her chair, gripping her clipboard a little tighter, as if bracing herself. Malcolm, on the other hand, exuded an effortless calm. His voice was smooth, but beneath it was a quiet power, the kind that comes from someone who knows exactly where they stand and isn't afraid to say it. "You know, Diane," he began, locking eyes with her, "I wasn't always this composed. When I was younger, I used to get angry when people doubted me. When teachers suggested I set my sights lower because they didn't think I was capable of more. When I stepped into boardrooms and people assumed I was there to deliver coffee instead of sealing deals. The audience hung onto every word, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Malcolm continued, his voice steady but gaining momentum. He wasn't just speaking for himself anymore. He was speaking for everyone who had ever been underestimated. And the best was yet to come. But I've learned something along the way, Malcolm continued, his voice steady yet charged with conviction. People's biases, whether they realize them or not, say more about them than they do about me. And I made a decision a long time ago. No matter how many obstacles were thrown in my path, I wouldn't let anyone else define my worth. That's why I'm here today. Diane shifted slightly in her chair. For the first time, she looked uneasy, the balance of power in the conversation slipping from her grasp. That's a compelling perspective, Malcolm, she said, her tone carefully measured, an attempt to reclaim control. But don't you think that anger you mentioned, well, couldn't it be counterproductive? Malcolm's eyes narrowed just slightly, but his smile remained. Anger can be destructive if you let it consume you, he acknowledged. But it can also be fuel. It's what kept me going when people told me I wasn't good enough. It pushed me to work harder, to learn faster, to put in longer hours than anyone else in the room. Then, he leaned forward, his voice lowering just enough to draw everyone in. But here's the thing, Diane, it's not just about me. It's about breaking the cycle for those who come after us. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the audience like a heavy fog. I mentor young entrepreneurs now, many of them from communities like the one I grew up in, Malcolm continued. And do you know what I tell them? I tell them to expect challenges, to expect people to doubt them. But I also tell them this: never let someone else's opinion of your potential limit your vision. Because the only person who gets to decide how far you'll go is you. The audience erupted. Applause thundered through the room, some members even rising to their feet. Through the room, some members even rising to their feet. Diane, for the first time in the interview, looked momentarily stunned. But Malcolm wasn't done. And if I can add one more thing, he said, his voice rising just above the applause, the real issue isn't just individual bias. It's the systems that continue to uphold inequality. That's why I invest in education, in scholarships, in community initiatives. Because success shouldn't be about being the exception, it should be accessible to anyone willing to put in the work. Diane's expression was unreadable now. The sharp confidence she carried at the start of the interview had dulled under the weight of Malcolm's words. Well, Malcolm, she said after a pause, her voice noticeably softer, you've certainly given us a lot to think about. But the real conversation had only just begun, far beyond the studio walls. The interview ended with a handshake, Diane forcing a polite smile. But the audience's standing ovation spoke louder than any scripted closing remarks. As Malcolm walked off stage, head held high, he had no idea that his words were already setting the internet on fire. By the time he reached his car, clips of the interview had begun circulating online, posted by audience members who had witnessed the moment firsthand. The first viral video was a shaky phone recording of Malcolm's poised response to Diane's veiled accusations. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. Malcolm Daniels schooling Diane Strickland in the most elegant way possible, read one caption, followed by trending hashtags like #RespectMalcolm and #BiasExposed. By nightfall, the clip had surpassed 1 million views. But it didn't stop there. Major news outlets picked up the story, framing the interview as more than just a tense exchange. It was a cultural reckoning. It wasn't just about Diane Strickland's comments. It was about the larger issue of how society views success stories from marginalized communities. Talk show panels debated the moment. Podcasts dissected every word. Online forums exploded with discussions. Some hailed Malcolm as a role model, praising his grace under pressure. Others scrutinized Diane's words, questioning whether her approach was simply ignorance or something more insidious. Malcolm's phone was flooded with messages. Old friends, colleagues, and even complete strangers reaching out to thank him. You said what so many of us have felt for years, one message read. I showed my kids that clip. You've inspired them to never stop believing in themselves, wrote another. Meanwhile, Diane found herself on the defensive. For days, her name trended, but not in the way she had hoped. Hashtags like #Diane Strickland exposed painted her as a symbol of outdated thinking. And as the world debated the moment, one thing became clear. Malcolm Daniels hadn't just won an argument. He had ignited a movement. And with that, the conversation around Diane Strickland had shifted, from respected interviewer to a symbol of outdated and discriminatory thinking. In an attempt to salvage her reputation, Diane released a carefully worded statement, insisting that her questions had been taken out of context and that she had never intended to offend. But the damage was done. Public opinion had turned against her, and the once polished image she had spent years crafting was now tarnished. For Malcolm, however, the moment became more than just a viral clip. He refused to let it be reduced to mere internet drama. Instead, he used the newfound attention to amplify his message, appearing on major platforms to discuss systemic barriers, the power of resilience, and the importance of mentorship. Then, in a move that silenced any remaining skeptics, Malcolm announced a new initiative dedicated to supporting underrepresented entrepreneurs, funded entirely by donations that poured in after the interview. "This isn't just about me," he told one reporter. "It's about creating opportunities for the next generation. Success shouldn't be about beating the odds, it should be about changing them." The ripple effects were undeniable. Stories of people inspired by Malcolm's words began surfacing. Young professionals taking bold risks in their careers. Community leaders launching programs to uplift local talent. Students who, for the first time, saw themselves reflected in someone like him and believed they, too, could succeed. But beyond the headlines and trending hashtags, Malcolm's words lingered in the minds of those who had heard them, challenging people to rethink their assumptions about success, privilege, and perseverance. Weeks after the interview, the buzz around Malcolm's powerful moment hadn't faded. News outlets still referenced it as a cultural turning point. Social media remained flooded with posts celebrating his poise and integrity. Yet, for Malcolm, the true impact wasn't in the media attention. It was in the quiet, personal moments, the messages, the emails, the lives he had touched. One letter stood out. It came from a high school senior named Jordan, who had been struggling after a series of college rejections. "When I saw you on that stage, speaking with so much confidence, it felt like you were talking directly to me," the letter read. "You reminded me that my worth isn't tied to what others think of me. I'm going to keep trying, because of you." Malcolm folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. It wasn't the only one. There were dozens like it, each one a reminder of why he had fought so hard, why his success had to mean more than just personal accolades. As for Diane, her show continued, but the impact of the controversy never faded. Ratings steadily declined. Some of her most loyal viewers turned away, disappointed by her lack of accountability. Though she remained unapologetic in public, insiders whispered about growing tensions behind the scenes. Her name, once synonymous with sharp, unfiltered commentary, had become a cautionary tale. A warning of what happens when bias overshadows meaningful dialogue. Meanwhile, Malcolm stayed focused on what truly mattered. His initiative for underrepresented entrepreneurs took off, providing resources, mentorship, and funding to hundreds of aspiring business owners. He traveled across the country, speaking at schools, community centers, and conferences, not just sharing his success story, but passing on the lessons he had learned along the way. At one event, standing before a packed auditorium in Dallas, Texas, Malcolm addressed the crowd with the same calm confidence he had shown on Diane's show. "The greatest challenge isn't proving others wrong," he said. "It's proving yourself right. The world will always have people who doubt you, who try to diminish your worth. But their words don't define your journey. You do." The audience erupted into applause. But Malcolm's expression remained humble. Because for every person clapping, he knew there were countless others still facing the same barriers he had once overcome. His work wasn't done, and he was ready for the challenge. Because in the end, Malcolm's story wasn't just about one man's rise to success. It was about the power of resilience, the importance of representation, and the belief that no matter where you come from, your potential is limitless. If Malcolm's journey resonated with you, take a moment to think about the power of your own story. Whether you're overcoming challenges or supporting someone else's dreams, your actions can make a difference. Share this video. Leave your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire, challenge, and change the way we see the world.